So I figured might as well get started. Hello, everyone. This is Your Brand, Your Business. I'm Galen Herbstad Cortina, and this is Ernest Jones. Ernest, who are you? What do you do? Besides your name, obviously, since I just said it.
Well, just for the people in the back, I am Ernest Jones. I am a CPA who helps broadcasters, game devs, and anyone adjacent to the game industry with their taxes. And I'm coming off a fresh tongue lashing from Loco, so I'm a little wounded right now.
Oh, no. What did you do? Oh.
Yeah, you saw it. You were in the group DM. She yelled at me. It's uncalled for.
Okay. See, I missed that part of it. I see it now.
Okay.
Anyways, and I'm Galen Herbst. I'm a financial planner. I work primarily with streamers, although I also have some in industry and outside of industry folks. So today we wanted to talk about something that Ernest and I have observed, over our time working with broadcasters, and that's how your income to expense profile can change over time as a streamer. There's a couple reasons that we think this is important, which I will let Ernest touch on in a bit. And also apologies if you hear random crying. My daughter is at the end of a nap, so she may be popping up. You guys are actually lucky that I'm here, because about 15 minutes ago my daughter was asleep on my chest, and it took my wife wanting to hold her for me to actually get up and start the show.
Yeah, well, everyone needs to go like that tweet that you posted so you can farm that ratio, a good ratio.
There's a much cuter photo from this morning of her smiling, wearing a really cute outfit, and if I put it up over here, I wouldn't get anything done because I'd just be looking at it the whole time.
Do it for her.
Anyways, yeah, exactly. Simpsons references. She's doing well, Wes. Thanks for asking. So Ernest, why did we want to talk about this topic today?
We wanted to talk about this topic because we kind of wanted to approach a question that you and I get a lot about, hey, what can I expense when it comes to taxes? Can I get away with this? Is this okay? Do I have to set up an LLC to take expenses? These are all various questions we get, and we wanted to approach it from a different angle because it's, I think, our number one most asked question. At least for me, it definitely is.
Yeah, we get that all the time. I mean, we got it in several different forms during our TwitchCon panel and all constantly during the workshop that we did and things like that. And I feel like in the various sort of groups that we're a part of, we get that question all the time. Another thing too that another thing that I sort of get asked that's related to that, and that relates to this topic as well, is sometimes as people ask me, what should I be spending? In terms of like, they're worrying that they are spending too much or too little in their business. They don't know if they are focusing on the right things. Frankly, and this is one thing that we'll talk about during this, once you're doing pretty well at streaming and making a full-time living from it, it's a relatively low overhead business. And by that, I mean your costs relative to your income are low compared to most businesses. So think about a restaurant, right? If you were running a restaurant, you would need to have all of the equipment, the food that you serve people, wait staff, the hosting staff, kitchen staff. You would have to be really worried about like health inspectors and all of those kinds of things, right? You can get away without all of that as a streamer. So once you're there, it looks great. The once you're there is obviously the like, me saying that's like, wow, thanks so much for helping me. Once I've made it, it'll be great.
Right.
But so when one thing I'd say is like, we can start off with, since it's like you said, thing we get asked all the time, why are expenses important? What are the common expenses that people should know about? Just to sort of knock that out of the way.
Well, and also one other thing too is that I was going to say on the profile thing, it's kind of managing expectations, because a lot of people are expecting either success right away, rather faultly, or they're upside down, and it's like, hey, is this correct?
Right.
So on that, you ask,
what's that GIF of the dude typing on his keyboard and money just falls around him? The like super old school '90s animation one. I'll find it for you while you're talking about
Did you just say GIF?
I did.
First of all, it's GIF because it stands for graphic. Anyway.
Giraffic interface. Yeah. Go on.
Or giraffic, yeah. Anyway, so the type of expenses that you should be expecting as a streamer are, one thing is anything that touches your stream, right? So clearly all of the equipment that you have either bought for the stream, whether it's a webcam, you upgraded to a DSLR, a microphone, whatever you've done, all of that are expenses you should expect. And then there are other expenses. Yeah, I saw it. I'm not getting a reaction. I'm a professional. But then the other expenses you would have are the overhead. What it costs to. Let me take a step back. In accounting specifically, you classify expenses in two ways. Well, lots of ways, but what I'm thinking of is cost of goods sold, right? So to make it your restaurant analogy, this would be the cost of being able to sell a product, right? So this would be direct kitchen staff, wait staff, the cost of the food itself. To bring it to streaming, that would be the games itself, the actual hardware that you're using, internet and things like that. And then you have your, SG&A is what it's called, selling, general, and administrative. And what that is paying a professional like an attorney, paying an accountant, paying a financial planner, rent that's not associated with a stream. Like there are these kind of just cost of doing business. You may have heard that term before, that are associated with a stream and
but aren't directly related to the product that you sell.
Exactly. Like you could make a case that your management, if you have a management company, right, and you're paying them a commission or some sort of, thing like that, that actually isn't the cost of the stream. I would say one way
you could accomplish the same thing by literally hiring an individual to do your management as opposed to outsourcing it to a company where they aren't directly revenue producing necessarily, or they could be, but they make sure that things happen that are important to revenue being generated in the business.
Yeah, one way I've gone to explain it is if you didn't sell a single thing, you'd still have to have various carrying costs. And whatever those are your kind of administrative costs. How have you tried to explain explain differences in expenses and, how vital they are and, relation to the business scaling?
The one that, again, it's not quite as applicable to streamers, but is for me, I really like people to think about it in once they're established, at least in terms of fixed versus variable costs, which is a slightly different split than SG&A versus cost of goods sold. But the fixed costs are what you described: the carrying costs, the sunk costs, whatever, the things that happen on an ongoing basis with no change. That could be, again, your internet bill. That could be things like, the amount that you, well, God, for a streamer, it's again harder to come up with those, but the amount that you pay in rent, right? That kind of stuff. Versus the variable costs being like games that you have to purchase or remotes that you might have to commission and that don't happen as consistently or have a different price point or change sort of as you have success. Because, in the example of a restaurant, the fixed costs are things like rent versus the variable costs are, unit costs are the food that goes into each meal. Your fixed costs stay the same no matter what. The unit costs change as you sell more. We've talked about this in terms of people who are selling coaching services, right? There's if it's a product that has an additional cost per unit that you sell, you need to really account for that because, if it's coaching and it's your time, there's only so much time you have in a day and there's only so much you can sell in terms of coaching. Anyways, we're talking about expenses here, which we're also calling costs. And our original point around that was that fortunately for most of you, fortunately and unfortunately, you're in an industry where your costs are relatively low, your cost of doing business. The reason it's fortunate is because it makes it easier to start up, right? And makes it easier to operate with lower revenue. The unfortunate is more from my experience, which is you guys get away with so damn much because you don't have to spend much that you aren't often very good at then managing those costs once they do grow. You're kind of forced to be very diligent about costs if costs are high, and since they aren't as a streamer, you get a little bit more lax. And so then there's me on the back end going.
Well, and the business concept is that, ideally, if you're trying to increase your profit as a small business owner, there's different kind of broad approaches: increase revenue and cut costs. And because, like you just alluded to, cost of entry is very low. You know, like you could do it on one PC. You don't need, unless you're playing a high-end game, you don't need that strongest of a PC. Really, the most core value or core component is strong internet, right? And then as it scales, as you grow your brand and as you potentially transition to full-time or doing very well and you start getting activations, your costs really don't go up. And so on that, we wanted to also talk about how the profile changes as you enter and as it matures and grows and as you kind of hit the maturity phase, right? Because, all right, Galen, I'm going to ask you a business 101 question that's probably like a million years ago.
It's kind of like a long time since I've taken those.
What's like the 4 cycles to like a business growth phase or like a product adoption? Because that's essentially the same thing.
There's, I don't know that I'll get the exact terms right, but there's like startup or initiation, which is usually before or as you make your first sale, which is like we were just talking about, everything it takes to get a stream up and running at its most basic level. So that's not, these lights, that might not even be this camera, but it is some form of audio. It is the actual console or PC upon which you're running the game. It is the game itself. It is internet, right? There are some really basic hardware and software things that you need to actually be able to stream. So there's that initial startup phase. There is what I have called the sort of the growth or expansion phase, where the business is hopefully rapidly growing and putting a lot of effort into growing. There's the maturity, I'd call it, phase, where you've sort of reached a level where you've saturated your natural market. So that's, if you're a company that sells PCs, say basically, I'll make it more generic. If you sell a product and there are only 100,000 consumers and you've sold 100,000 of that product, it's very hard for you to expand much beyond that. Mm-hmm. Unless you add new products, unless you do what tech companies do and build death dates into their products and slow down hardware with new software updates. And then there's sort of the like wind down, phase out, close, whatever you'd call it, part of business.
The decline, insert your dead channel memes here, right?
Exactly. The move to Mixer. No, I'm kidding. That's a joke.
Well, I mean, but here's the thing, though. That's a good transition point, because the thing is, it's a cycle, right? So you could say, and not casting aspersions, but like you can say all the people who moved, right? Especially in the big people who moved in the news. It's like it started with entry, growth, maturity, not necessarily decline, but maybe in your example, tapped out their market with this platform, and then they start again. They enter a new market, which would be like the other platforms, Mixer, YouTube, whatever, and then they start the cycle again.
For the record, negotiating entry into a new market when you're at your strongest point in your current one is a very good move. Doing it before you decline, because inevitably everything does, right, is a very smart business move.
So really, we're transitioning topics. We're here to talk about entropy and the concept therein. No? Okay, moving on.
So anyways, the reason that concept of the business cycle is important is because, A, you're running a business as a streamer, or at least it's a streamer who's intending to make money from it. So knowing that those things don't necessarily happen, because not every business hits the growth phase, not every business hits maturity phase, but knowing that there are phases to business, and unless you take steps to adapt when you're in those phases, you may go through that natural cycle, is an important thing. And then the other piece of it is the sort of original topic we have here, this expense profiles, is knowing what phase you're in can also help you know what your current expenses might look like and what your future expenses might look like, which can help you with planning. So Ernest, we talked about it briefly, but someone who's just starting up as a streamer, what does their income versus expense profile look like?
So to be specific, just starting streaming, we're talking probably someone who, we'll say for this example, just got affiliate shipped, right? So that way, because that's when you can
Because they
start
can earn
receiving
some
payouts.
revenue. Presumably,
Exactly.
you shouldn't be putting a tip button on your channel before you're an affiliate because, God, that barrier's low.
But shoot your shot. But so if you're an affiliate, right, the payout I think is still 600, I think, or is it 100?
100
100. So you got to earn $100 before you earn anything. So
before you get paid out.
before you get paid out, pardon me. And so I would expect your revenue profile to be very low, like maybe $1,000 on the high end, maybe 2,000 on the extreme high end.
In what period of time?
In maybe the first like 2 years in that affiliateship window. And your expenses, I expect you to be upside down. By that, I mean, I expect you to be spending more related to the business than what you're pulling in. Simply allocating some of your internet bill, some of your phone bill, because I know people in that streamer life, if they aren't streaming actively, they're on Discord managing the community or in other communities or networking on Twitter, on TikTok, on Friendster, on Napster, on LimeWire, just networking and doing what they need to do. And so a lot of expenses you can tie to the stream. You may take your first year's worth of equipment, figure out what it would have been worth if you sold it. That's an expense technically because you're contributing equipment to the business that has some selling costs. What else would I be thinking of? Some
Games.
portion of rent, games, absolutely.
If you buy things that you wouldn't have otherwise bought, like maybe you do buy some lights, for instance.
Yeah, a ring light or something. Yeah.
Because I mean, lighting makes a difference. Like I'm not even a good streamer or anything like that, but see how much weirder it looks if I just have my really basic lighting turned off.
Yeah, well, I have basic lighting, so it looks terrible. So I mean, yeah.
But so I think really though, point being, we expect that when you're in the startup phase of business, you'll be running with a profile where your expenses are higher than your income. Whether or not that's your actual cash flow, by which I mean your dollars out versus dollars in, is negative, that might not be the case. Because like Ernest said, it could be that you're contributing your PC to the business where you spent the cash on it 3 or 4 years ago, so it's not an actual cash expense for the business this year, but it's but it is something that you, from the business's perspective, contributed, and would be an expense. So early on, we expect you to run negative from the business perspective, from the accounting perspective. And that
your time is not an expense, as valuable as it is. You can't be like, oh, I gotta write this off for taxes because I spent 80 hours streaming, and that has value. That's not how that works, unfortunately.
Right, exactly. And I mean, we expect your income to be low, essentially. When you don't have a big stream, when you don't have many viewers, you're probably not going to be earning much revenue because overall numbers, overall, and not one-to-one, but the higher your viewership count, generally the higher your revenue because there is more opportunity for tips, subs, outside
activations,
groups looking
bounty
for
board,
yep,
etc., etc. And we're talking again, someone who just hit affiliateship, which I don't know the exact metrics to do that, but it's not a crazy
3
barrier.
concurrents and 50 followers and a certain number streamed per month. I don't remember what that is.
Yeah, and so that's not a hard barrier necessarily, and it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to make revenue off of it, right? Again, you may be, if you look at the people who quote unquote like really made it, the huge people. Hey Ash, is that they started as a hobby, and it slowly gained momentum, and they became partner, and not even when they got the partner button, they necessarily went full time, right? And so as you're going through that growth phase, there's this kind of push and pull, I would say. I'm interested in your thoughts on it, because you could be playing it very close to the vest because you're not sure how real it necessarily is. Like say, okay, you've gone from 1,000 to 2,000 in revenue every couple of years to 15,000. And you may say in a couple years, like, I mean, if you're doing that, like there's two kind of avenues for Twitch. Something happens and your stream pops, or it's just slow and steady growth and you're building up to that point. But some people will invest a lot into, as they're going, because they're taking it very serious isn't the right word, but they're looking at reinvesting it to try to improve the quality of the stream and potentially expedite that growth process. Like, so they may switch to a 2 PC setup immediately,
Mm-hmm.
right? And they may buy ring lights, DSLR. Like you can, the barrier to entry for streaming is low, but I've seen, some of the equipment people buy, and it can get pretty expensive, initially. I mean,
But
so
typically, typically when we're working with someone who is in the latter half of their growth stage, say, I would say a really standard thing for us to see is they started off with very little revenue, not a ton in expenses, but more in expenses than revenue. Something happens, time put in, new game, they just have the right combination of luck, skill, hard work, so on and so forth happens, and the stream does well. And by does well, we mean makes what? High four, low five figures, right? That's
I would say, yeah. So we're talking in this growth phase where you are transitioning to being able to do this full time
mm-hmm.
and be what, we call kind of like a working actor,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
You're not necessarily, let's see. Well, hey, did you know that it's Matthew McConaughey's 50th birthday today?
Is it really?
Yep. So you may not be, that sort of level of movie star, but you may be, a character actor and being able to do this full time.
One of those actors where everyone goes like, God, I don't know that guy's
person,
name, but
yep.
I've seen him in like 6 things. And
exactly. Mm-hmm. So as you're transitioning, you have an expense burden, and you may also now start going to cons, right? We know someone who, in the last year had a crazy con schedule. We know someone else who had a crazy con schedule this year, and just so much travel. And yeah, some of it was sponsored, but some of it was out of pocket, right? So
typically the point is here, typically what we see is early on, you're earning less than you're spending in the business. Then once your revenue increases and you're earning more than you were at that sort of baseline spending level that we were talking about, the kind of fixed costs of operating the business, we typically see streamers reinvest all of that extra stuff back into the business. That could be equipment upgrades, or the people at least who really are planning for growth, as opposed to this is always going to be a hobby, they've got a day job that they like, kind of a thing. So we typically see people reinvest most of that growth back into the business. Like I said, that's cons. That's equipment upgrades. That's redoing the art on their channel. That's, a whole just host of things, but it's really common for you to have it where, expenses are here, income is here, income goes up to here, expenses come up to match, at least for a bit, right? Because you're doing all of those sort of necessary for growth businessy things that you couldn't afford earlier. That happened in my business. Hell, there were a bunch of expenses that I took on that weren't absolutely essential to running my business at the most bare bones level, but I took on because they enabled me to grow. Yeah. So is that typically what you've seen? Hell, sometimes it's even just like paying off past debts and things like that, right? But that reinvestment is key.
Yes. So I'm trying to think of a good use case, and I'm thinking of one right now with the mutual actually. And game came out, stream popped for them, and it had that steady like row for them, churned it, like upgraded the whole setup, new desk, mounts, monitors, mic setup, good quality, had like full kind of like let's go.
Mm-hmm.
And then after that, so this is a good transition point. So that's what I've seen, like just to Galen's point. First couple of years, you're either upside down, best case scenario, neutral, meaning you're spending as much as you're taking in on it.
A hobby that pays for itself.
Hobby that pays for itself. And if you love what you do, you never work a day in your life, which is the most so like dumb. Asinine comment.
I love what I do.
We're so bitter. Constantly. We're so bitter.
I love what I do, and I constantly am working.
But then as it grows and you transition to that full-time aspect, you're going to have a year, and maybe it's spread over a couple years, where you invest heavily in equipment and just the stream itself. And then after you are now full-time, what ends to end up happening, and I always use this term incorrectly, is that expenses flatten out, and it's kind of like an upside down hockey stick, is kind of, if you look at it on a graph, right, where it's going up, 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 and then it flattens out. and it maintains relatively consistent. Because
Yep.
what does it cost to run a stream? Unless you are opening 10,000 CSGO cases or 10,000 loot boxes.
Buying what is it, Twitter followers from sup streamers or whatever it is. What was that recent thing, that bullshit follower for
Oh, I don't
purchase
know, but
followers?
like that was the latest streamer Twitter, like
Yeah,
just dragging, that happens like once a week.
but
Yeah, and we have a comment. Hey, the thought of romanticizing streaming, right? That it's this idea that you can be profitable, and yeah, it's a definitely saturated and competitive market. But
and it's
people have found,
entertainment. Entertainment's hard no matter what, because entertainment is super fickle.
yeah, I mean, this is, yeah, streaming is the equivalent of the person. I mean, you're in LA, Galen. You know the people who like go on auditions, go on auditions for pilots, and just never get called up.
I have streamers who I love to death and would super enjoy, hanging out with at a convention, who I don't watch anymore because their stream schedule puts them on either in the middle of the day when I'm super busy or in the evening when I'm hanging out with my wife and daughter, right? Whereas those used to be times where middle of the day when my business was just starting and I didn't have a shitload to do, like, yeah, I could have a stream on. Or now, having a baby makes me a lot less available to watch streams at night, kind of a thing. So entertainment is just fickle for something that might not even be your fault at all, right? So it's super common.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
But
yeah.
yeah, so what I would say is, for reference, I've seen people who've been able to make a living and a good living. Won't say any numbers, but I will say the expense profiles. Um, I've seen expenses top out 30, 40,000 is typical what I see in terms of operating the business. And that's, where you're paying mods, you have legal fees,
And
you
it
have
depends on what your business
content.
is. So like, well, I have some clients who are casters in esports, and their expense profile can be a little higher early on because they might be paying their own way to go to events, or at least
Oh yeah.
getting only partial compensation, or so on and so forth. But yeah, 30 to 40,000 baseline is what I've seen as well. At least for someone who is now full in terms of expenses, who is now comfortably full time.
And that's before we talk about, things like sheltering, like funding,
Oh yeah, yeah.
retirement plan, things like that. We're talking core to operate the business. And I don't care if you're making 150 to 4 million, 10 million, whatever. The cost of operating your stream is lower. I mean, yeah, you can have some of that spike up with branding and things like that, but it's generally low increase, low velocity on the increasing of expenses.
Mm-hmm.
You may be,
You might have 1 year where it spikes because you do a big equipment upgrade or
you may
something
do a
like that.
studio, right? Because you've really made it now or something,
Mm-hmm.
right? Um, but again, one thing to keep in mind is this profile is general. It depends on your content. If you are a cooking or art stream,
Right.
it wouldn't surprise me if you're
Higher operating costs.
higher operating costs.
Mm-hmm.
If you are an IRL streamer, right? You are traveling
Higher
to
operating costs for sure.
Canada, Russia, Japan, South Korea, all
Or
these
even not that, just the backpacks. It's like it can be like 600 a month to get the appropriate
the
level
data.
of wireless coverage. Yeah, data coverage to do it. So, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
But so I'd say in general, we've seen people top out their expenses at, and also like not even just in terms of dollar amounts, because that can change heavily based on where you are. But we've seen people top out at maybe like their expenses hitting typically again 30 to 40% of their revenue, right?
I would say for the what I would deem the working class.
Oh, maybe even lower then.
Yeah, because I'm thinking, if you're, so let's do this. If you're telling me, hey, my Twitch revenue, I did a couple activations, my total revenue was $80,000 for the year. I would say, okay, well, my expectation, I would do my tax interview sort of questions, but my expectation, as soon as they tell me that number, maybe 20 to 30,000 in expenses.
Yeah, if they live in LA, it'll be higher. If they live in middle of
Yeah.
nowhere, Iowa, it'll be lower, and a lot of that's due to rent.
Yeah, because we're taking home office, exactly. Quick aside, someone was telling me their LA rent situation. And I was like, how much did you pay to rent? And they're like, in LA. And I was like, oh, why do you do this? And it wasn't even a broadcaster, it was a traditional client. It's something like 3,000 a month. And I was like, oh, you could buy like a house in most places for that. It's kind of crazy.
What do you think I
Tangent aside.
spend?
But I mean, no, but we live in the same place now. I'm not sure
Okay.
how it shows up though, because my walls are gray now. So I have to put like art back there eventually.
Yeah, LA is brutal, exactly.
Um,
It's all
but
these
yeah,
damn
so,
people who think they can make it in Hollywood
mm-hmm.
and zoning
uh,
laws, but you know.
and but whatever. It's just, there's a lot of stuff to unpack there. Anyway, so when it comes to expense profiles, it tends to cap out. Like I've consulted with some people, and it's just tough to find expenses that are for that. And one thing that I always underline, and it drives Galen crazy, is that we'll hear random people say, "Oh, my tax person says I should spend more money on the business so I pay less tax." That is the dumbest thing.
There are very, very rare circumstances where that makes sense. Like,
So do you want
very
to?
rare.
So I normally tee this off, but I'll actually tee you up to dunk this. That's a mixed metaphor just for you.
Yeah. Golf
Well,
and basketball? All right.
yeah, exactly. Well, tee it up. That could also be a baseball reference too. So it's okay,
Oh, I thought you meant like a tee you up like in basketball. I thought you
No,
were
no,
bringing
no,
it
no.
back to basketball. Yeah, generally, expenses in your business reduce your taxable income. So a dollar of expenses reduces your taxable income. But if your taxable income is like in the 20% bracket or less, which is true of most Americans, then every dollar you spend is really probably only reducing your taxes by 20 cents, but is reducing the amount that you can take home by the rest of that dollar, 80 cents. There are some really small edge cases where truly having your business have a little bit less in net income can make you eligible for some really nice tax benefits. But that's, I mean, you're
If
talking
you don't
really
plan
like
for exceptions.
specific, like you're talking like sometimes maybe, well, hell, if you're a married couple and you're earning $401,000 through a business, spend
Yeah,
the
we want to
extra
get it lower.
$10 so that you can get the child tax credit if you also happen to have kids, right? But
Yep.
like, did you hear how many ifs I just said there? And and the credit's only
Yeah.
worth
It,
$2,000. So then if you're earning $406,000, it's not worth it. And yeah,
Yeah, and the math is this simple. You can go spend $100, save $25 in tax. So effectively, that purchase cost you $75.
Yep.
Right. So
still
it's 100 out the
cost you
door.
$75.
Right. Or you can keep the $100, pay the $25 in tax, and keep $75.
Yeah.
You built, like, you have more money this way.
So we should circle back to expense for
Yep.
profiles because we do have a tendency to get distracted. We
Of
talked
course.
about so far. We've talked about just starting out. We expect your expenses to be higher than what you're earning, mostly because you're just not earning much. And the fixed expenses of running a business the maintenance costs of running a business are not high for a stream, but higher than zero. And typically you're earning near zero early on. Next, once you get into, and that's sort of like early affiliateship, then there's a growth phase where you're starting to earn more through the business, a couple $1,000s a year, maybe even north of $10,000, but that's still pretty low in terms of a money generating thing for someone who lives in the US, right? We typically see at that point that a lot of that gets reinvested either into you or the business. Sometimes it gets reinvested into like paying off credit card debt or medical debt or student loans or something like that, right? Sometimes it gets reinvested into hey, play guys are going. Sometimes it gets reinvested into the business where it would be equipment upgrades, which we very typically see, right? Someone who's operating on a, well, hell, me, right? Who's operating on a junk computer that he bought 7 years in the past for not a ton of money, and then finally was able to be like, haha, I can actually pay a little bit to upgrade this so I can actually have a functioning PC.
Yeah, and are you still on your old laptop, or you still got your new one?
I mean, my laptop's like 2 years old. 3 years old.
Sorry. I thought you had an older one.
No.
Sorry.
My wife
so,
did.
I mean, that same concept, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah. But the idea is you upgrade the equipment but you're reinvesting in the business. You're buying things that let the business run better. These purchases might be fun in part, but these aren't fun purchases. They're things that are necessary to allow the business to grow. Because if you have a terrible audio setup or video setup, or your PC just can't run certain games that really mesh well with your audience, odds are you're restricted in how much you can grow. So typically we see, until people are earning several tens of thousands of dollars through streaming, which is very rare that people get to that level, that you're mostly reinvesting in the business. And then once you've crossed that point and you're able to look at maybe full-time streaming, then we see this next profile that we talked about, which is 25 to 30% of what you're earning goes into overhead, and then the rest, the rest is something that you could theoretically pay yourself. I'd say the next step after that is what I would call a mature stream, not in terms of like 18 plus or adults only or something like that, but mature business cycle wise, of someone who's been full-time for a couple years. They're getting activations, by which I mean sponsorships, as a solid part of their revenue. So usually, 10 to 25% of their revenue is those activations. It's not just coming from their community.
You have other sources. You're platform agnostic, so you have a recorded YouTube revenue stream. You have merch theoretically.
Yep. So once people see that point, we see their expense profile. There we go. We see their expense profile shift again, but that shift then comes in
on the
terms
revenue
of
side.
Well,
percentage.
it comes on the revenue side of revenue shooting up, and if they have expense increases, those expense increases tend to be outsourcing, right? They tend to be things that buy them time, not things like equipment. So buying them time could be hiring Ernest to do your taxes instead of doing it yourself. It could be hiring a manager or a management group or an agent, so that you aren't having to be the one sourcing deals, tracking down payments, all that kind of things.
Having an attorney to review all of your contracts.
Exactly. Having an artist who does your emotes and does them regularly on an ongoing basis, so on and so forth, right?
Theoretically, paying the mod team.
Yep.
I've heard of instances of that, or at least, as a reward for modding in the channel, I will fly you out to TwitchCon.
Exactly.
And get you a pass, like that sort of thing.
So the next shift really comes in terms of your revenue mix changing, becoming a lot less centered on your audience providing support direct through either your streaming platform or tips, and more towards being varied. And then your expenses gearing more towards services that buy you time, because you can afford to do that and your time becomes increasingly valuable. Additionally, that's when you see people start to look at some of the stuff that Ernest and I have talked about, and what we typically are working on with clients, which is things that can help you save on the taxes side, or can help you save for future retirement planning, that kind of a thing. So it's not a shift. It's not necessarily a shift in a business expense, but it's a shift to where that excess revenue is going. Could be things like we've talked about with an LLC taxes, moving to being taxes and S corp, paying yourself on payroll. It could be setting up a basic retirement account in the business. Those kinds of things become increasingly important because your tax rates are going up. What am I missing in terms of the more mature businesses?
I mean, you kind of hit on all of them. I would say, to get an idea, like if you're a top 1,000 or top 100, however you want to cut your strata, it's not, you've probably seen, if we're all on Twitter, because it's the worst thing ever made, people complain about their tax burden either come April or come quarterly time, right? And that is driven by the fact that there is not a lot of expenses to add, even with sheltering and all that, because most broadcasters tend to be young, so there's no real aggressive sheltering you can do. Well, yeah, exactly. To that point, it's what we went back to. It's that if you're paying a huge tax burden, it's likely because you have
a lot of money,
and or you're doing really well, and you haven't calibrated and planned appropriately for your own standard of personal living and your business. And that's a balance that plug Galen, that's what he handles, right? That's the concept. So, but that's what you see, is that expense burden doesn't really increase. What happens is it's just not a good understanding of what can I spend money on? How can I live? And some people will have their Smaug, you have to say it right, Smaug gold doubloons all around them, because they just aren't ready for it, and they have this, they're afraid of this giant tax bill coming down for them.
Yep. And so, yeah, like I said, I mean, we have clients who are earning several $100,000 a year whose expenses are not much higher than when they were earning significantly less than that. And so they find themselves with the not terrible, but problem from a business perspective of what do I do with all this extra cash, right? Again, boohoo, not the worst problem to have, but it is still one that you have to deal with, right? So that's one of the big changes we see is then people have to figure out how do they address that. Do they pay that out to themselves? That makes them kind of uncomfortable because they're not used to paying themselves because they're used to being broke, right?
They're talking like the 1%ers, basically.
Yeah, exactly. Like, no, we're talking about really rare occurrences on
because, and to be clear, we're not talking like if you view the top 10 on Twitch or top 20 or top 30. I'm saying it's such a saturated market to be able to do this full time. You are a 1%er in that regard because most of the people who stream on the platform either do it as a hobby or just never hit that like actual growth curve.
Yep.
Right. Like, let me look at the Fortnite directory. Should I do that?
Go for it. But also, we don't typically see if you were a channel in decline, say a business near the end of its life cycle, you do typically see again the reversion back to expenses creeping up on your income or on your revenue, mostly because you're earning less revenue. So if we were to outline it early on, your expenses are probably higher than your revenue or what you're earning just because you aren't earning very much. Then there's a point where your revenue creeps above your expenses, and then typically we see expenses increase to match that revenue because you're doing necessary reinvestment in the business, preparing yourself for growth. Then you reach a saturation point, I guess I'd say, where you essentially don't have more new things to spend on. Which is not a bad thing. That's a good thing, right? But then at that point, suddenly each dollar that you earn is much more going to you as opposed to going to keeping the business afloat. Then there is the point after that where your revenue has gone up so much that you are, as Salty just said, figuring out savings, 401k, long-term security, the kind of stuff that I work on with clients.
Health insurance, because you should have had it sooner than this, but hopefully it's time to get to it.
And even things like making decisions around, maybe going for health insurance that allows you to get more catastrophic coverage level kind of stuff because you can afford to take a $5,000 hit, but not a $100,000 hit, right? And just you gear yourself much more towards dealing with potential taxes than you are worried about being able to put food on the table and pay your bills. So, and then sometimes you see, and again, if you see a channel in decline, then you sometimes see that reversion back. But that's typically what it looks like expense profile wise. The reason that Ernest and I are talking about this at all is if you are running a streaming business, this can help you figure out where you are in that cycle. And, if you're someone who is currently spending more than you're earning in the business, know that doesn't necessarily mean that you're bad at what you do or anything like that, but is more along the lines of you may just be in that point in your business cycle. Now, each of these is an opportunity for reflection, right? If you find yourself matching one of these profiles, you should be asking yourself, how long has my business looked like this? Does it look like this will continue in the future? Is this something that I might be able to take steps to change? And the reason there, again, being a lot of businesses don't reach that takeoff point that we alluded to, that growth curve. And if you haven't hit that in a couple of years, it's not to say that you won't ever. No, or so we don't in the U.S. It's not. I know like Australia has a super fund and a lot of countries have pensions, but not in the U.S. to the same level. We have that a bit with Social Security, but not to the same level of a lot of other countries. But anyways, the point is overall, this is an opportunity to say, okay, where am I in this cycle, and what are things that I might need to change, or even change my thinking about, like business wise, or even expectations wise, right? You're muted for some reason.
I'm muted because I was searching for your article that I was going to link to that question. Because it's a good article and not enough people have read it. So I was doing that on your behalf.
Well, yeah, okay. That. We do that in Norway too. Yeah, that's because you guys have a ridiculous amount of oil money, so you can just afford to throw that into whatever you want for a population of 10 people.
Wow. I
That's not
think those are shots.
not really. It's them. It's their sovereign fund is actually them making Norway's sovereign fund is them making some very very good long term financial decisions based on a short term boon, which is that oil.
Mm-hmm. Um,
And also there
dozens
aren't
of
just
us.
many. There exactly.
Dozens of
And
us.
also there just aren't many of them because then you got to live in Norway, which is beautiful but freezing.
Yep. But I linked an article that you wrote about on various retirement plans for streamers specifically, but it's for everyone. But on that question that you asked, yeah, I don't think I think it's important to realize that if you are doing this and you're trying to transition full time, it's going to be hard just generally. But that if you are neutral or upside down for expenses, that doesn't mean you have like not made it yet. Now, it's kind of like I'm gonna cast shade at the people. Oh no. Okay, we're good.
I clicked a
Good.
button accidentally.
Mm-hmm.
I meant to click one button, clicked another one, realized what I
Yep.
did, fixed it immediately. We're
Yep.
good.
Well, yeah. Don't know what you're talking about. Didn't
Problem
see
solved.
anything. But like, it's kind of like people who take a licensing exam, like a CFP or a CPA. I'm sure you've heard these cases of someone who's done it for like 10 years, try to take this exam and pass it, and just haven't. That doesn't mean the person is like a failure or a bad person, but like it may be time to change careers or look for something else, right? Because that's not or change something because something is not working. So if you're operating neutrally or upside down for 10 years as a broadcaster, it may be time to change things.
And not necessarily, we don't mean stop broadcasting or anything like that. It just may be that it's not, maybe this isn't something that ends up being a business for you. This may end up being a hobby, right?
That pays for itself.
That pays for itself. That's not bad. But looking at these kind of profiles and seeing where your spending is gives you a chance. Where your spending is gives you a chance to, wow, that was bad. I just did the full. I was speaking more Spanish than normal this weekend because of the whole Dia de los Muertos thing with the family, and I just said spending.
Okay.
I know. Anyways, this is an opportunity for reflection, and it's an opportunity for, if you do find yourself moving through those phases, suddenly earning more than you used to, knowing, wait, this is a chance. This is where a lot of people start reinvesting. Maybe that's something that I should do as well, right? It gives you a chance to do good business planning.
Yeah, I mean, I would say
You don't say e-money. It's only on the S, or is it not so like Spanish to Espanol? Not yeah.
but I would say the expectation would be if 3 and 4 years of doing this and you've tried to go full time, like you made the leap, and you are operating at a significant, at a loss or not making money after the business expenses, and you have nothing left personally, that's when like self-reflection and reevaluation needs to occur. Specifically, if you've decided I'm going to make this leap, I would have a plan in place with the idea of this expense profile that you have like a 3-year window to make this work, assuming you've done all of your proper due diligence and planning, and you have a emergency fund that you should have in place regardless of what you're doing. But you've done all of this, right? Does that seem fair, Galen? Like a 3-year window to basically, assuming you've done everything?
Yeah. And again, this isn't to say that there won't be further changes in the future, right? But it gives you, I think it gives you a way to reflect back on what you've done so far.
It's kind of what I do a lot of, and I think you too, Galen, is a lot of what I do, what I explain to people is expectation management. So I prepared a return and people have gotten like a $3,000 refund and they've chewed me out because they think it should be more.
Oh.
And I've
Are
had
these streamers?
No, not streamers.
Oh, I was going to say, God,
No,
streamers getting any refund means that you were a friggin' miracle worker.
Every broadcaster I work with, whether they're a client or not, are fantastic and they shall work with me. Anyway. Or like I've had people who owe $10,000 and they don't blink, right? Because it's just an expectation management game, right? And so the broader point is that these profiles, where you're just starting and you're upside down, and as you're going through the growth and you're neutral, and then you've kind of matured and now you're showing profit. What does it look like? And that gives you something to temper expectations and know how to evaluate things.
I mean, I had plenty of people tell me that starting up your own financial planning firm will suck for 3 years, at least. Just because of the way that we earn revenue, if you're not going for a commission basis, which I'm not, because it will suck for at least 3 years because of you're building recurring revenue, but recurring revenue when it's only $100 still isn't great. But $100 every, added on every couple weeks over years ends up suddenly being a shitload of money, right? And so that was actually really valuable for me to know. Wildly valuable. It still sucked. It didn't change the fact that it sucked, but at least the fact that I knew that it was going to suck made me feel, I'd say, a little bit less despair, and helped me approach my planning as, no, it's supposed to suck right now, so as long as I'm doing things that move it in the right direction, and on reflection it does look like it's moving in the right direction, then I can kind of, I am better at managing my own in my business behavior and doing the right things.
And one important point is that almost all businesses operate at a loss year one.
Oh God, yeah. Yeah.
Like streaming may not be, because you may suddenly catch that 0.001% use case. Again, we don't talk about exceptions, but you're going to operate at a loss early. And
frankly, if you're not operating at a loss, that probably means that you're not actually accurately tracking your expenses.
And we all have people in our lives. This is kind of an analogy to that, the point you just made, where they have some sort of illness and they just don't know what it is, be it pain or whatever it is. And the worst part for a lot of them is just not knowing what's wrong with it, right? So the idea of like being informed and knowing what to expect is more useful than not knowing and managing it. And to Urza's question, could you win the lottery? Yeah, I'm not saying going into streaming, like cashing in like a lottery, but I would say a business that starts profitable in year one is a bit like a lottery ticket, in that it's not the common case. Like I would say, I'm just going to pull a number, maybe 20% of businesses are profitable, but that's because they have like built in, like they're a spin-off of another business. Like a bunch of people left and they pull clients with them, right? That I would carve those out and say that's not actually a business starting.
They're not starting from zero. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Starting from zero, which you would with a stream or any other, like your business, my business, for example, you're going to be upside down. Like it's just the nature of it.
My first full year of business was I ran basically break even, and the reason I ran break even is because I spent so little that it ended up matching my expense profile. But then that next year, I also only did a little bit better than break even because I started spending more on things that I should have been spending on in the first place, but was able to get away with for a while.
You bootstrapped it.
Yeah, exactly. Called. And so, but to reflect back to Urza's point, is that's kind of like saying you could win the lottery? Yep, exactly. It's like saying, yeah, that could happen, but we don't expect that to happen. And knowing that the expectation, knowing that you may see someone who wins the lottery in a form, and knowing that that's not the normal case, is a positive thing for mental health, I'd say.
What's the saying that you always give me shit about? It's we make a decision based on the best available facts that we had at the time.
Yeah, and it could have been the right decision at the time that ended up being incorrect in the long term, and you can't have known that ahead of time. Got a question. Is the failure rate with streamers about the same as normal? I assume that means other businesses, or lower, since it's often started as a hobby. Depends on how you determine failure rate.
Yeah, that's interesting, because it's like, how would you cut that to
how many? What is the comparison point between people who start a restaurant intending it to be a business, which I assume is basically every restaurant, versus the people who start a stream intending it to be something that supports them, right? I would guess that, sort of like the question there with the hobby, I would guess that that's a hard analysis to do, because you don't... Oh, my phone just buzzed loudly. Because you don't know how many people are intending it to be a business when they start out. I think, did that get us through most of what we wanted to talk about? I am open to take questions now that we saw that.
We had a kind of a brief synopsis outline, and we wanted to talk about that. I mean, I'm not going to do the IRS definition of expenses, because I do that almost every show. It's kind of like my version of there's a snake in my boot and somebody poisoned the well. But yeah, if there are any other questions,
the water hole.
The water hole. Dang it.
I just watched Toy Story 4 like last week, so.
Oh, what did you think of it? Because I haven't seen it yet. Good?
It was fine. It was a children's movie. I mean, and it was a children's movie that wasn't as poignant as like what was it? How's it called? Not Inside Out. The emotion, the one about
Yeah, it's Inside Out.
Inside Out. God,
Or I
something
think it's
like that.
Inside Out. I mean, breaking news. Galen does not have the childlike wonder to enjoy Toy Story.
I don't. No, I straight up don't. Uh, there's like a lot of children's movies. It moved to resolutions and happy endings much more quickly than seemed.
Plausible.
Yeah, because it had to,
Mm,
keep up the pace. Um,
gotcha. All
but
right. Well, I
anyways,
don't see any questions. Oh,
yeah, and my daughter
huh.
will remind me of it. Yeah. Oh God, I don't know what the movie is going to be yet, but there will be some point where there's some movie that I've watched 50 times in a month. It'll feel
Okay,
like, and it'll
I've
drive
got a
me insane.
tangent for this.
Oh no.
So I have a younger sister. She's 4 years younger than me. I'm 35. Oh, boom, boom, and clap. And she's 30, whatever now, right? So 4 years younger. Growing up, she loved the Grease like movie with John Travolta and
Mm-hmm.
Olivia Newton-John.
It's a lot of
She like,
musicals. I feel
yeah,
like.
she wore that tape out. And I would hide it from her. Like, I'm tired of hearing this effing song. She would cry. It was a nightmare. And so I can't wait to for one generation it was Frozen, right? Like if
Oh
you're
God, I could only imagine.
right,
For let's see, for my sister, I mean, frankly, actually, for one of my sister was like The Sound of Music, just because it's like a classic
because
one
the
there.
hills are alive, yeah.
So like my wife and her family enjoy The Sound of Music. They went to a like live show slash sing along of The Sound of Music at the Hollywood Bowl. The Hollywood Bowl does really cool shows. We went and saw last year Jaws with the LA Philharmonic playing the soundtrack in perfect sync with the movie, and it was so good. Anyways, they went and saw that, and I was like, oh no, I've got these other plans. I can't make it to see The Sound of Music, which is a good movie, but just I heard it so many damn times as a kid that I
All
cannot
right,
watch it now.
I'm gonna type you a joke afterwards because I can't make that joke here.
Amp, not for me. I don't like pineapple. It's too sweet for me. But
I don't
I
I
do
don't mind
get
it.
the sweet, savory, salty combo. It's specifically pineapple that I don't like, but the concept of sweet, salty, savory is good. I like, pretzels with chocolate on them, right? Or those, oh God, those fucking peanut butter filled pretzels.
No, those
Jesus,
are great.
those are so, I eat those until I'm sick.
Um,
Wizard of Oz, oh God, yeah. Fast forwarding every time he looked away. That's amazing. That's brilliant.
that is really good. All right, so I don't see any other questions in.
Button
We're
Mash said thought of something, but then honey roasted
okay.
peanuts, yeah, same idea. But so I get the concept of pineapple on pizza. I just personally don't like pineapple in anything. So for me, it would be a no. But it's like because of pineapple, not because of pineapple on pizza. Does it matter if they're LLC or personality set up for your SSN for taxes?
Oh, yeah.
Almost no streamer would. Oh yeah, go for it, Hunter. Almost no streamer would have a corporate structure that doesn't flow through to their personal return because it tends not to make sense. I know that Nerd Fusion, for instance, is set up that way, but that's super unusual, right? Is that fair to say, Ernest?
The Nerd Fusion one is such a unique situation that is the non-use case. But
I'm
yeah,
saying so, but
yeah,
we're looking at the inverted case of almost everyone, almost every streamer in the U.S. has or should have, assuming they're at the point that this actually makes a difference for them, a corporate structure where it still flows through to them, as
yes,
opposed to being a separate return on just the business.
right. What I would say is, here's my
And the reason for that is because you
standard.
get taxed twice, right?
Yep.
If it's on the business level, so it tends to only make sense if you have like hundreds or thousands of owners.
Here's my standard sort of like autopilot response to that. Kind of when I'm talking with broadcasters is that an LLC is specifically for legal protection. It's not for tax benefits, and so you can structure it into favorable tax positions depending on your own facts and circumstances. But I think your underlying question is you do not need an LLC to write off expenses. Like I could start mowing lawns as kind of the go-to accounting example, right? And um, that doesn't mean I need to have an LLC. I can still take expenses, the lawnmower, the gas for the lawnmower. I'm in business just by the fact that I'm soliciting people to mow their lawns. Um, and so you don't need an LLC to be able to write off expenses. Um,
And a
yeah,
trust is a whole separate thing, tends not to be a business entity. A trust can hold business entities and so on and so forth, but that tends to be more for like estate
asset
planning
protection
and
yeah.
asset protection on the individual or family level, not on the business side. And depends state to state when you need one and so on and so forth. It's different.
It's different, yeah. I mean, that's kind of
it would be a very long discussion to fully outline
and
those,
it's not
relevant
very
to
useful. Yeah.
anyone who has under at least $1 million, I'd say.
I think it could make sense if you had some hard physical assets like real estate, theoretically.
Okay, yeah.
I mean, listen, I'm technically correct, which is the best type of correct. And with that, do you want to throw us out of here? Oh, hold on, one more. Yes, I was thinking more like the business or LLC would take the income and taxes instead of
okay. So we can talk about that. So briefly, so almost every streamer is the sole owner of their business. There aren't other owners involved in the business, right? There may be people that they pay as contractors, but they're the only ones who owe the business. In that circumstance, it tends to make sense to have... You might choose a business structure that lets you allocate how some of your income gets taxed, but the fact that it's an LLC, for instance, you still only want it taxed once at the personal level because the only person receiving compensation from the business as an owner is the streamer. If you were to set up something like a C corporation, which again we were saying Nerd Fusion is, that gets taxed at the entity level, it tends to not make sense because you're still only paying out one person from that entity, so then it gets taxed at the entity and again at the personal level. Yeah. If you have a bunch of owners, then it can make sense for it to get taxed at the entity level and again at the individual level because it makes that structure a lot easier and it makes selling shares in that business a lot easier. But that's not really relevant if you're the only owner.
Yeah.
And so, that was a very brief overview of it.
What I would say in short is that most streamers are sole owner entities where they aren't bringing in a lot of various partners that have an ownership stake in their brand. Again, corner cases exist, but we don't talk about corner cases. Mm-hmm. So in that circumstance, like you alluded to, it doesn't make sense to have a separate entity being taxed when really it's just a single person with ownership stake. And let's see.
Not our area of expertise, or is that neither of us are attorneys. It's a fair question. Neither of us are attorneys, so we can't really jump on that.
I mean, I feel like the spirit of Joel would be fine with me.
Do not. I'm going to mute you if you try and give legal advice on this stream.
What if I say I'm not an attorney, but...
God, I just saw the thing you DM'd me. You're the worst person.
I am the worst person. All right, so let's wrap it up. We're at an hour. We don't want to... We're both a little loopy.
So Hunter, there's actually literally like a big thing because of like that I do talk about trusts, estate planning, that kind of stuff on the financial side. There's actually a really big thing about the unauthorized practice of law that I have to be very careful to avoid. It's like a major thing for me, I assume as well for Ernest. Hunter, we were talking about like an emote for it depends, an emote for disclaimer, like maybe just like big ass stamp red disclaimer kind of thing. We're trying to figure it out. But yeah, did your dabbing molly emote. Anyways, oh God, I hate you.
All right, we're off the rails. We're completely off the rails.
We're done. This is your brand, your business. I'm Galen Herbst Cortina. I'm a financial planner who works with streamers and avoids dabbing at all costs.
I'm Ernest Jones, Dab's an accountant, and I'm a CPA that works with broadcasters, game devs, and people adjacent to the industry with their tax burdens.
I'm going to make Noah run this with you just so that I can escape. All right. Anyways, thank you guys so much for tuning in. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, everybody.
Our goal is to be back next week. So we'll see you again.
Submit to us a topic. Yeah, I ask this every year or every show. Come on, somebody give me something.
All right. Bye, folks.
All right, bye.